I also had a good chuckle about like their haircuts. I'm wondering if they gave each other a
Ah,
haircut.
no, no, they didn't have those haircuts. They were shaved. Their heads were shaved
Wow.
when they went into the care of Bernardo's because of head lice and disease and everything like that.
Wow. And
So
so,
they would have been completely cleansed because before that they appeared to be living on the street. Hi, John.
hey, how's it going?
Hiya, how are you?
Good. I was worried that was going to happen. I was thinking like, oh yeah, like if we jump ahead an hour, then Tom's not going to show up on time.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
so was it actually supposed to be at 12 o'clock your time?
Yeah, yeah. Well, technically, I guess it would be 11 then right now.
Yeah.
But we jumped ahead an hour, so now it's 12 for me.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah,
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
thought, yeah, okay. Well, that's what I was getting. Yeah. Well, no, I'm speaking to John, and it's been about an hour's time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
How are you anyway?
Good, man. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks very much. Did
Awesome.
you like all the transcription stuff that I did?
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I was gonna say, like, for people listening, this is just like how the podcast usually starts. This
Okay.
is my cousin. Well, we always refer to you as cousin Tom.
Okay.
So my cousin Tom from England, and
Okay.
this is going to be a little bit different of a podcast for people that are tuning in. I wanted to do this, record this as an episode, because we had a chat earlier about like our family history and how you had dove into that and like been doing that since like the 70s, right? So
Yeah.
there's so much there that I want to unpack and like have as like an archive basically on this YouTube channel for future generations to look back on as well, as long as the
Yep.
technology still exists. So
Exactly.
it's not going to be the typical interview type. We're going to be more so telling the story of Fred and Albert.
Okay. That sounds absolutely great. And I think it's also a good idea. We can share this with all of our family members who maybe are not quite as interested. So it kind of will get them maybe interested in the sort of story. And I think the stories are fascinating stories.
Yeah, yeah, of course. One thing too, before we kick off, I forgot to say this to you last time. I was always impressed that every year on my birthday, there'd be a card in the mail on the day of my birthday from you. So thank you for that. Because that was always something that I was like, how does he do it? How does he time when it's gonna be here exactly on the date of my birthday? And I went to my mom and I was like, did you hold on to the envelope and then give it to me on my birthday and oh, this just came in the mail for you? And she said, no, it always came right on your birthday.
I mean, the thing about it is, a little bit like Aunt Muriel, our Aunt
Mm,
Muriel, who moved to the States. I'm somebody who, I've always been this kind of person who is just 3,000 miles away, living his life there. We're related to him, but we never see him and we never hear from him. And so, therefore, I took a lot of time into, well, trying to sort of, send cards and things like that to just keep the connections up, really. And I think that hasn't always been successful, but it's been quite good with your Aunt Heather and with your mom, and we've always tried to see each other whenever I'm around, and that's been great.
now you would be first cousins with my mom and my Aunt Heather, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So would that make us second cousins then? Is that how that lineage works?
I think you could probably do a podcast on this because
Yeah, I've always been baffled by that.
I'm baffled by it. I don't think you're my second cousin. I think you're my first cousin once removed.
Once removed, that's the
Yeah. So because so I think you're my first cousin once removed because your mom and I were both children of a brother and a sister.
mm-hmm.
Whereas, if it's someone who's married into the family, then that's all a little bit more, that's a bit more distant.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the same blood in us. It's just that you've got the Canes and the Rogersons, and I've got the Hurlbits, and I've got the Ferris. I've got the Hurlbits, and you've got the Canes and the Rogersons.
Hmm.
But you've got the same admixture of blood that I've got, basically.
Yeah. And so for people wondering, the lineage that we're following here right now is the Davises. So that would be um, my grandmother's father.
That's right.
And
Your
so,
great grandfather and
yeah,
my
which was Albert, correct?
Frederick,
Frederick. Okay.
Fred,
Albert
Fred,
was uncle.
Uncle Albert. That's
Uncle
right.
Albert. Okay. And I'll share a photo here of them. Then, and this is what really like kind of kicked it off for me because um when just looking at like the facial features here, I'm just like, man, like it's some strong genes that have
Ah,
persisted through, like just in here, like this looks like my mom. Like I can see that clearly. I also had a good chuckle about like their haircuts. I'm wondering if they gave each other a
ah,
haircut.
no, no, they didn't have those haircuts. They were shaved. Their heads were shaved
Wow.
when they went into the care of Bernardo's because of head lice and disease and everything like that.
Wow. And
So
so
they would have been completely cleansed because before that they appeared to be living on the street.
yeah, I guess we'll start at the beginning, and that's kind of where like a lot of my questions started coming in. So their mother had passed away, and they were probably around what would you say, 10 or so at that time?
Yeah, so Albert was 9. No, pardon me. Albert was 12 and Fred was nearly 10.
Okay. And
And
their dad
did you
wasn't really present, if you will, at that time. And so as boys
uh
do, they were off probably getting into some trouble.
I think that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
they may have been street children because they may have been living on the streets, but they were certainly neglected according to the authorities. And their dad, our your great great grandfather, or more my great grandfather, Samuel Davis, not Sammy Davis. There isn't any kind of show business connection here, okay?
That'd be crazy.
But Samuel Davis, he was basically he was a drunken good for nothing, or he was lazy and didn't work, or
Hmm.
he made a living holding horses outside saloons because there were no cars in those days, very few. And so he would have held horses that were actually leading carriages outside saloons. He wasn't actually um, he didn't have a profession, and he was just basically doing pickup jobs. He was
Ah,
kind of
he was a
nearly the love.
contract worker.
No, we would
We call it a freelancer now, Tom.
freelancer. Yeah, exactly. That's it. But years before, looking back at he was an agricultural laborer, and this is if I can just kind of just
Please,
chat for
rant.
a second.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah, please.
I'm here to
He's
listen.
the Okay. I mean, you got to think about the world in the 19th century, which was changing tremendously. If you think about all the things that we've got today that weren't even invented then, it was just an enormous sort of change that the world was going through. The Industrial Revolution had already started, and we started to mechanize agriculture and production and build sort of manufacturing companies and industries. And this actually threw masses of people out of work in the rural economy. And that's why, today people, one person can produce enough food in any Western country for multiple hundreds and thousands of people all by themselves with machines. But those machines replace labor. That labor ended up not having any places to go. The cities were growing enormously at that time and had becoming magnets for these people. But obviously, that brought in massive social problems: no housing, not enough food, not enough regular employment, all this sort of stuff, social problems.
It eerily sounds
Um,
similar to what's happening today with the technological revolution. Do you know,
it
like
does sound
it's
very, very similar.
shortage of
Yeah.
housing and mass immigration, like job loss. It's crazy how history sort of repeats itself.
It really is crazy. So that was the kind of background. So when we talk about Samuel, um, yeah, he was, the words are written down there that he was a lazy, good for nothing, and all that sort of stuff. But on the other hand, I see him as a bit of a victim, as many hundreds of thousands,
Hmm.
millions of people were at the same time, of these massive changes, and he was not resilient enough to react to them. So when he was born in Enfield in North London. It was quite a genteel and very rural sort of area at that time, because London, although it was the biggest city in the world at that time, it was actually um, they were had yet to completely build all the rail networks out to the sort of suburbs, which actually
Mm.
created the suburbs and actually then took over all the farmland. So he was an agricultural laborer, and he was a general laborer, and he might have even been a contractor. I agree with you. We don't know the nature of what he did, but he was in the censuses from his birth right through till sort of the 1890s. He was just a general laborer, and we know nothing about what his life was about. But
Wow.
all of a sudden, this one sort of incident in the East End in 1902 brings all of that into sharp relief, where he basically, is exposed as someone who's been neglecting his children. He's a bit of a drinker. He's actually a bit of a waster, to be quite honest. But on the other hand, his wife would have just died, and we just don't know about what all the things were that he was going through. He had two older daughters who were actually had moved out and whatever. He wasn't coping terrifically well. The family had broken up. So
Mm.
I've got sympathy with the person, although you can't actually sort of gainsay the description of him, which is pretty damning in the
Yeah.
record we have from Dr. Bernardo's. And this is how he was described by the people that picked up the
Yeah.
children wandering in the street.
And now, like, this is always something that I've had a bit of a gripe with. And when it comes to history, especially recorded history, and it's a saying that's been said a million times, but history is written by the victor, right? Like, we never really get to hear, when you look back at like the Greeks versus the Persians, or those big battles, the Persians are always viewed as the enemy, the villain of the story. It's like, well, were they? Or were they pinned that way so that you want to side with the Greeks or the Romans, or what have you, right? So in this scenario, the Bernardos versus our own family, I'm thinking that like the only way that the Bernardos could convince the state to allow them to take in these children is by describing a desolate situation, a situation where the father is not around, there's no fixed address, the mother isn't present, so they don't have that. So we have no choice but to take them in. Like, and that's kind of the situation that you pinned. And then on the flip side of that, the root of all evil is money, right? And
Yeah,
so if you are looking for a motivating factor, you're looking at Canada becoming a nation that they're wanting to send people to colonize, to populate with English citizens. And there was definitely like incentives from the government at that time. I know for France, at least, they had told the women in France, if you move to Quebec with one of our military people, we'll give you X amount of money per child that you have. So
yeah,
I know there was incentives from Europe to be sending people over to this area of the world. So to me,
yeah.
that's where I start. You kind of have to take the Bernardo story with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I take the Bernardo story. I agree with you. I think I take the Bernardo story as probably as accurate as we can possibly get, and we
It's the
can't read
only what we have, right? That's the
what we
hard part,
have.
right?
but yeah, there were larger social forces. There's no doubt about it, and those have been kind of developing since about the early 19th century, because obviously the government was watching this problem occurring, and it actually needed to react to it. So they
Mm,
started to build what I would now call the kind of legislation and regulation of social care and of family duties and obligations that we have nowadays that allow the authorities to intervene where people do not treat other people in their family correctly and whatever. And they started to build that, but the problem kept occurring, and Bernardo was a doctor from Ireland. He was going to go abroad and join a missionary sort of missionaries and
mm.
administer to the poor in foreign countries. And then he realized the problem on his doorstep was enormous. And so he opened a series of small homes for children. And then after he opened his first home, I mean, they had limited capacity, so he had to turn this child away. So the story goes. And that the next day, the child was found dead that they turned away in Bernardo's. And
Ah,
and so he basically said, that's it. We're not turning any children away. We're going to be open 24 hours. We will never refuse any child. So that became their watchword from then on. And they were the government. You're correct. The government worked with them because they basically were picking up the detritus of society.
yeah.
I'm afraid to say they were picking up the casualties, I should say.
Mhm.
Casualties is a better word. They were picking up casualties from the sort of unrefined capitalism that was actually taking place, and unrefined change to, technology that was actually driving all this sort of change and leaving all these human casualties.
Yeah, no, no doubt. And just it's just like baffling for me. Okay, I have a big gripe with people today's age that talk about trauma. They talk about like trauma that they have. People my age and younger talk about the trauma that they have from, they went to Starbucks and they got the wrong order and it or the coffee burnt their lip and now they're traumatized by coffee. And I'm like, if you just look at what your grandparents, your great grandparents went through, your trauma pales in comparison. And the anxiety that they must have had to during this time, like imagine losing your mother, imagine your father not being present, imagine being sent to a different country that you've never been to before and being told you're going to live here, you're going to work here, and that's it. That's you have
That
no choice.
you're absolutely right. This
That's
is and
traumatic. Like,
that's pretty traumatic, actually. And if you look at the fear in the eyes, in their eyes in that photograph that you showed, you can see that sort of multiple times over, that they were sort of fearful of what was going to happen. They'd already been in court. They'd already been uh, the court had actually summoned the father to report on why they've been neglecting the children, and they'd already been passed through the National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children, NSPCC, who then passed them straight to Bernardo's to lodge them in emergency accommodation in Stepney Causeway. And then they were then distributed to each of the Bernardo's houses, obviously prior to being assessed or prior to being put on a ship to Canada. And and if you think of urban London at that time in the early 20th century, only a few years into the century, and all the different smells and all the different, sort of the urban life, the clangor, the noise, the dust, and all that sort of stuff. And you're transformed from that environment to a you know a township that's basically east of Kingston, Ontario, and you're multiple concessions back from the water, and you're at a farm, and your whole life then becomes the farm animals, the farm family, and that's it.
Hmm.
It is a tremendous, tremendous change and tremendous trauma that they went through. And they didn't survive unscathed, I think we know.
Hmm. Now, how long did they stay together when they came to Canada?
So they, so just to go through the voyage,
Yeah.
they
Oh, yeah,
voyaged.
that would be important to talk
Oh
about, I
no, it's
guess.
okay. No, that's fine. They voyaged on the SS Colonian. They were on the same ship, and they left together, and then they arrived together in the same ship, and they arrived at Portland, Maine. And I don't know how they got from Portland, Maine to Eastern Ontario, but I suspect it would be the railway.
Hmm.
There were the railway networks completely covered all the face of North America at that time. Where your grandmother and granddad used to live in Lynn, Ontario had two train stations
Oh, wow.
in the mid 1930s. So, so they would have actually easily got on a train in Portland, Maine, and then gone overland through Ogdensburg, and then probably came the last little bit by boat. They
Across
may have
the St. Lawrence, maybe.
to St. Lawrence.
Yeah.
They may have gone to Brockville because Bernardo's had an office in Brockville, which was kind of a receiving center and whatever. And then they would have gone, they would have been driven out to Willets Home, Ontario, in Pittsburgh Township, as it was at that time. It's now known as south of Frontenac County.
Mm.
So just west of Gananoque, or Gan for your Canadian
Yeah.
listeners. Just west of Gan.
Commonly accidentally called Gananaque.
The banana queue,
Yeah.
yeah. But and so this was tremendously unsettling, and the questions that must have been going through their minds at that time: Will I ever see my sisters again? Will I ever see my father again?
My
Where are we?
birthplace. Like I couldn't imagine getting on a boat and
What
just
going
sailing
on?
away and just hoping the best. Like what were those waters like? Like did they get
Yeah,
seasick? Like was there enough food on the boat? Did they go days without eating or drinking water?
yeah.
Like who
That's right.
knows?
We have a picture of the ship, and we know they were there. They were on the ship's manifest, so they were recorded as being on the voyage, and they were recorded as landing in Portland. So all of
Wow.
those things check out. Um, but no, and then they're in this rural area now, with people they've never met before, and you know, heaven knows what those people were like. We have
Yeah,
no information other than the Bernardo's records that we have. And
right,
as
which
you
I have
know,
here.
they have what I would call a positivity bias.
Which I love that the way that you describe it. It does sound like a positivity bias. So this was the magazine, right, that Bernardo's would publish,
That's right.
published under the auspices of Dr. Bernardo's Canadian Homes,
Yeah.
and
So
we have them
this was
listed
this was
here.
published by the Canadians. Yep. And the two people that they were actually put out with, Robert Lackey and William Bell.
And so
And then
I was going to say for the
no,
listeners,
please
the
go ahead.
article says the brothers Albert and Freddie Davis are near together in the township of Pittsburgh. Little Freddie is evidently a great pet in his new home, while Albert is giving every possible satisfaction and is under the care of kindly Christian people.
Yes. And obviously with over 120 years of looking back on those words and everything that we now know about how children can be treated by adults and maltreated by adults, maybe even abused by adults, maybe even worse.
Hmm.
Those words kind of don't actually come across to us today with the same meaning they would have come across to in 1903
Yeah.
when the magazine was published.
And now this next excerpt rather says Mrs. William Murrison of Allensville writes of Frederick Davis, he is growing strong and healthy, and I would miss him very much if he were taken away. He is so good to the little ones. He is just used he what does that
Just
say? He
you.
is just used like oh, he is just used like one of our own. That's interesting wording. He is just used like one of
That's
our
right.
own. He is a good boy and we can trust him with anything.
Yeah.
Uh,
Ah,
Yeah, that's the definition of child labor, folks.
well, that's right.
We
Yeah.
use
No,
him just like our own.
but yes, but child labor. Wow, that's such a complicated topic because
Yeah,
sometimes child labor keeps the children and the family afloat.
I
And
mean
although
it.
we abominate it here in
Yeah.
India and other places, often the child working means the child is living.
Hmm. And I mean that happened like up until so recently. Like Jim Carrey has that famous story of dropping out of high school and needing to go work at like a shoe factory to help with his parents. Like, and they were still living in a van because it was just like hard times.
Really hard, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But to get back to your question that you asked, how long were they together or whatever? In Albert's record, you'll see that he wrote and said that he and Fred went to school together, and they obviously lived in the same area. They weren't sent to two different areas of Ontario. So I guess there must have been some attempt to keep them nearby so that they could be comforts for each other, unlike because why would you separate? If you only have one boy or one girl and you
Yeah.
need to send them away, that's a different matter. But if you've got
Sure.
two that already know each other,
Yeah. You'd think that they would be stronger together.
you'd think, yeah. But on the other hand, you then got to only place them with somebody that needs two. And as
Mm.
you know, these were indentured contracts. I mean, indentured, it's not slavery. Okay. It's not slavery.
Servitude.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess that's it. They have to agree to stay, and Bernardo's administer them. It's like a fostering arrangement
Hmm.
in essence, but with they're paid, $100 at the end of their time, and they're given food, clothing, necessities, all that stuff.
Hmm.
And so it's not slavery, and they're not working for nothing, but equally, it's not quite they're free to do what they like either.
Yeah.
So it's a gray area. Um, and they stayed in the same or similar area for a very, very long time. And in fact, ending when the whole of Albert's life ended, when he died in 1956, he was still living in Gananoque. He never really moved very far from that area, and he tended to stay in the Willits home area or nearby or in Gananoque, which was just a few miles to the east.
Hmm.
Um, Fred, on the other hand, Fred was, I think, a more interesting sort of in a more interesting situation. You'll see on the Bernardo's records that they have Fred as going to a second family that's the Curtises, and he apparently didn't like it there because he left them before his agreement had completed.
Wow.
Which so there was something bad there, or something that he didn't like, or someone that didn't like him, or something going on
Hmm.
that meant he left there. But then if you look at Albert's record, he went to work in the Curtises. So that's a bit strange that
Yeah.
Albert would work at a place where Fred had not had decided not to work.
It might also
Um,
speak to their like maybe differing personalities as well. One could put up with something where the other didn't care to. Oh, I think we froze for a
That's right.
moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that, oh, sorry. And that starts to emerge. Some of the we don't have the reports, the visitors' reports, from all of the visitors who went to see them and report on the situation and the boys and how they were doing. Um, that they haven't been given to me. I don't think they've come down to us. I think what we see, the ledgers that record that they were visited and with some brief comments, I think that's all we're getting.
Mm,
Um, and in those sort of brief comments, you start to see some interesting things. I mean, there's almost totally positive comments about Fred, as far as we know, other than this situation with Alfred Curtis that he where he left early and everything like that. With Uncle Albert, there were comments made two or three times about how great he was and how what a superb worker he was, but he was untruthful.
mm,
And this was made several times that he was untruthful. And also, there were a couple of times when he said he wanted to go west. He said he was going to go west, and he clearly didn't go west, as far as we know. He also said that he and Fred were going to buy shares in a farm and farm that together, and that obviously didn't happen either. So I think the boys saw a lot of each other. They weren't exactly together, but they
mhm.
never were very far away from each other for a very long time, except when Fred, our granddad, went to work in Watertown as a bartender.
It's fascinating.
Now, how do you get to Watertown as a
Yeah.
bartender?
In America,
And
like
second,
that's like right across the border, you know what I mean? So it's like, why wouldn't you find a bar near you if you wanted to be a bartender? Maybe there was the only place that was hiring, or he could lie and
maybe
say he was a different age there or something. I don't know.
oh, I just don't know. But you sort of look at that and you sort of think, well, that's very strange behavior. And we know from other people who remember our granddad, and obviously we both don't,
Hmm.
um, but who remember our granddad, that he was teetotal. He did not drink anything. And I
Wow.
think that that was the example because he remembered the example of his dad, who was obviously, uh,
Yeah.
kind of described as a drunken layabout.
And that can have a real impact on a child, right? Like you see your parents doing anything like that, whether they're being mean to their spouse or they're, drinking, it tends to cause the child to say, I'm never going to be like that when I grow up. That it's that kind of pushback in a way.
That's right. He went to work in a cheese factory called the Woodburn.
Just such a great little anecdote. That they
Well,
worked in a cheese factory.
and that cheese factory is still there in Woodburn.
Wow.
It was on the Heritage Kingston register. It's private home now. But in Woodburn Road, that cheese factory is actually still there that he worked at. And that's not very far from Willett's home. So you see, again, they stayed in roughly the same area,
Hmm.
except for this Watertown expedition.
Yeah. Now, what was the other part that you were saying? Was it Freddie or Albert that was said that he wanted to earn money to send to his mother, which we thought was a weird.
Well,
Where did you find that?
that's just very, very funny, isn't it? Now,
Yeah,
we and I found it's difficult to read all that writing, which is why I haven't bothered to do it before. So I'm sorry
it's
I
okay.
have so long to sort of get through it. But basically, yeah, he got a watch. Yeah, 2000 1911. Boy writes requesting us to send him $4 from his account to send to his mother. And his mother had been dead for over a decade by that time. And he knew she was dead because she died before he was found wandering in the street and sent to Canada.
Hmm.
So that's and then you have that thing about untruthfulness. The problem is we've got little bits and pieces that we've got to try and deduce what it was really like.
Yeah. Maybe
We don't,
Samuel wanted to kind of preserve their innocence in a way and said that she had just left, do you know?
yeah, exactly,
Like
exactly.
it could have just been he didn't have the heart to kind of tell them. And unless they, I doubt they witnessed it, you know, they were probably not present for when it happened. I mean, who knows? Like who's to say, right? He could have just said, "Oh, she left."
That's right.
And
That's absolutely right.
no one really officially told them that their mother had passed.
That's absolutely right. And the interesting thing that doesn't appear in the Bernardo's records is that Albert went into the army in World War One,
Wow.
and his service started in 1916, and he came over to England in 1916.
So how old would he have been at that time?
So he would have been 26.
Okay.
So he joined the army,
So what?
and
Hold on. We gotta pause on that. That is a trip. You're a child. You leave your home country to a
yeah,
different country, and
that's
then
right.
your old country calls for your help again to come back and fight this war. And so
That's right.
you come back at 26 to your where you were born, but it's there to defend it.
That's right.
The battle that he must have been having in his own mind of being like, how do I defend a place that shipped me away?
That's
You know, that's what I'm
exactly
thinking, right? Like,
exactly. And you know the Canada's status at that time was it was an independent country,
sure.
but it was very much a dominion of Great Britain and
Yeah.
expected to draft people and send them over, et cetera, et cetera. Fred would have avoided that because Fred ended up getting married, settling in Brockville, and after initially joining the Grand Trunk Railway in Belleville, he actually got transferred to Brockville, which is obviously where he was living, and he lived in Charles Street, just across from where your mom used to work at the Brockville General.
Yeah. Actually, I have something. Let me just one sec.
Okay,
So my mom gave me this, and I've held on to it forever. It is a new dictionary of the English language, 1923 edition,
okay,
that belonged to the family. And just when you said Charles Street, there is a description here that says Hugh R. Ferris, and I won't dox the address, but it says Charles Street, Brockville, Ontario, Canada.
that's right.
So this was Hughes. It belonged to Hughes, and he had lived on Charles Street.
That's right. Yeah. So that was our Uncle Huey, who I never met because he died before I was born.
Wow.
But yeah, that was our Uncle Huey, who is known to be how can I put this? He was known to be contrary. You know, if it was sunny outside, he would say it's raining, things like that.
I feel like that's me.
Or the reverse.
I call it
Or
playing devil's advocate a little bit.
I think that's right. No. I think playing devil's advocate's a different thing
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
where you
He's a contrarian. Yeah, yeah.
deliberately to sort of try and
Uh,
provoke a discussion about the options.
sure.
But no, he was just yeah, he was a bastard. Anyway, is what I understand. But yeah, so the Albert and Fred sort of story is, I think, fascinating. And you know, we've got pictures of Grandpa Davis, Fred, at his workplace that have appeared in the Brothel Recorder and Times. I've got a few other pictures of him. I will share all of that with you and with everybody else so that we have a complete
Yeah.
version of everything that's there.
I have
Um,
it so that you can share screen if you want to at any point in time. If you have
okay.
something up, you just have to click the share screen at the bottom and then select the window or photo if you have the photo opened on your computer, and you
Okay, fine.
should be able to share.
I'm just going to pick something from that I picked up yesterday. Just a sec here.
Yeah, the photos that you sent me of the kids at the school is also like just so fascinating as well. Like
Yeah.
the big group photos.
Oh, yes. I think they're really, really interesting. So the screen I'm going to share with you is let's just going to share screen, and we'll get the Firefox up. Can you see that now?
Yeah, yeah, I got that.
Okay, so I'll just kind of so that's the SS Colonian. It says as it says a British transport cargo ship, steam, built in 1901. So it was actually relatively new when the boys actually got on it. So it would have
Wow.
been quite. There's you can see the sort of picture of it. And then if you want on the rec site website, you can actually sort of go into the history of it and everything like that.
Wow. Wait, wreck
So
site. So is that like a they just chronicle like different shipwrecks or
different shipwrecks actually,
wow.
which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Now let's just also, what did the boys see when they arrived in the United States for the first time? So let's go into Portland, Maine train station, and
Maybe we can add the date and it might even
that's the map. Images. There we are.
um
That
wow.
is what they would have actually seen. Union Station, Portland, Maine. When
1909.
So this would have been in 1909. So 7 years later, but still, it's going to be roughly like that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, of course. That's mostly going to be, it's going to look the same over that course of time.
That's right. Now let's just just go back to Google, and then we'll just put in Willits Home, Ontario, and you can see on Google Maps the sort of situation, which is actually sort of very, very near um, Gananoque.
Yeah, yeah. It's
So
just north a
there's
bit.
Willits Home. So Gan is right over here, and there's a Thousand Islands boat tours and all that
Wow.
sort of stuff. There's Willitsholme and Woodburn, the Woodburn Cheese Factory. That is Woodburn Road right down there that goes by
Wow.
post Joyceville. Woodburn Road goes down there. And as you can see, it's called Pittsburgh, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where they would have ended up. And where they would have operated from. Obviously, Albert ended up moving into Gananoque. He worked for an employer there named John Brown, who had a cartage business. And then after John Brown died, Albert started his own cartage business, or I guess he maybe took over John Brown's cartage business.
Wow.
I need to get Albert's obituary. Apparently, he also worked for the town of Gananoque in his later years. So there's going to be more information in the obituary, and I need to spend some time in the Gananoque library with the Gananoque librarians to kind of just explore if there's anything else I can get about
Yeah.
Willet Weber.
And the wonderful thing about it being sort of these smaller towns and cities that they had moved into is it's going to be a lot easier to access that information because those types of places will want to hold on to any type of history. Like in Brockville, for example, there is a Brockville History Museum that you can go to. And there are like archives where they keep track of all this stuff. Whereas I feel like if you were to try to get these things from bigger cities, like say if they just went to New York City, it would take you a lot longer to track this stuff down just because of the mass of people that are there.
Yeah, I think that that's right, and I think also it does depend on the name.
Mm.
Davis is pretty common
Yeah,
and
that's true.
very, very difficult to sort of it's very difficult to try and track people down. And it's not as if they were called things like sort of uh, Mackenzie Davis or Mackenzie, Timmins Davis or some nonsense like that. It's always Frederick, Thomas, Charles, all that sort of stuff. So it's very difficult to sort of figure out if the Davis you got is the Davis. This is definitely the Davis because obviously we know we have the correspondence, which we haven't shown, but we have correspondence from them, which actually sort of matches with all the information that we have. We also know that the Ferrises, so your my grandmother and your great grandmother, Granny Davis, was actually Jessica Priscilla Ferris. And so Fred would have actually moved in with his in-laws in Charles Street in
Mm,
early years, and they lived there for a very long time until they moved to Park Street, which is also in the Bernardo's records.
interesting that they stayed with them that long, the Bernardos.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Although, um, again, there's masses of stuff that we just don't really know, and that doesn't become apparent in the Bernardos, that isn't apparent in the Bernardos records, or isn't covered, or is omitted.
Mm,
Um, Part of the reason that they stayed with them so long is they wanted to keep telling this story out of the positivity bias, of course. They wanted to keep telling the story about the positive things that had happened to all the boys that they'd sent abroad,
mm,
um, and record all of that. Secondly, Fred started to contribute money to Bernardo's after the war, and so Bernardo started to get a very modern conception of charity fundraising. So you help
mm.
the people, and then the people can contribute to helping other people and whatever. Uh,
Wow.
so they had a motive for doing so. I think there must have been something in the Second World War, which we had our your great uncle, my uncle Bruce, who would have been the brother of your grandmother, Pat, and my dad, Charles. Uncle Bruce came over for the Second World War. He was in the Dieppe raid, in which a lot of Canadians were killed. He lived over here for a while. I cannot believe he did not meet his relations here.
Yeah, he must have.
And after he came back, I cannot believe he didn't have a conversation with his dad about the relations in England, and that at some point, but you see, then the trail gets lost somehow. I haven't got an Uncle Bruce here to ask what happened, but my dad and your grandmother, Pat Kane, she actually they both remembered that Grandpa Davis, Frederick Davis, actually always stated he was born in Wales. And he never really mentioned the Bernardo's connection at all. As far as I know, even though his wife, the Bernardo's visitor, actually met his wife once, we know from the transcript, at least claims to have met his wife.
Wow.
So, so there's a lot of this is a mystery that's going to go on and on, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
We could make another podcast probably in another month's time, when we'll know a lot more, I hope.
Yeah, yeah. No, I would love to keep doing this and keep trying to untangle some of this story here because yeah, that is almost a great way to end it this episode here because I feel like we're leaving it on a bit of a mystery for people that are following this here because this whole time we're talking about like Fred and Bernardo's and then you get to the point where he's even contributing to Bernardo's but doesn't tell his children that he was ever even associated with them even though
Yeah.
there's record of them meeting his wife.
No, that's right. And
That's
and
fascinating.
and Bernardo's told me when I visited their offices here and heard about this for the first time
Yeah.
that at that time the children were told to just forget your life in the old country. It's in the past.
Wow.
Make a new life for yourself. And we now, of course, we now know Freud actually worked in the early 20th century. There's no way that you can just forget.
Yeah.
You can move on from, but you cannot just forget. your life in the former country. And we know that Albert had problems with drink in his later years, and he also wasn't the most successful worker. He had health problems, according to his World War One records and whatever. According to my sister, Fred actually apparently had electroshock treatment,
Oh, wow.
and that was a thing in the 1950s. So, it's they you started the podcast by talking a bit about trauma. They were traumatized. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
That
Physically, mentally, and emotionally, for sure.
they did. They had successful lives. They lived longer than they would have lived if they hadn't gone, but they definitely suffered from it.
Ah, Tom, it's been wonderful chatting with you.
It's been great to chat with you, and
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the next chat. And I
Yeah,
hope
yeah,
that
definitely. Let's try to
I
schedule
hope
this as soon as we can.
and I hope that that's been good. If you give me about another month to try and explore ancestry, which I haven't done yet,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
I hope for some more information then.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do like 1 month check-ins. We'll just like each month we'll schedule an episode for each month. And then
And
that
of
way
course
you
you got
get more and more information.
your audience to think about there. Maybe somebody writes in and says, "This was really boring. I don't like it." So you might, in which case we'll just have an ordinary phone call.
No, 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 no. I didn't start doing a podcast because I cared what other people thought, that's for sure.
Oh, okay.
I'm doing this
Okay.
for me. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much, John. It's been great.
Yeah, of course. I love you, Tom.
Okay, you take
All
care.
right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
You've been listening to The Johnny Rogers Show. New episodes air every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.